Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Theology Thursday, where we are going through the epistles of the Apostle John. First John, in fact, and we're still in chapter 2 after
And we're still the same couple of verses, actually, from
right.
last time.
Verse 15 to 17 of 1 John 2. Why don't you read that
Just
first?
read those verses again.
Thanks, Dave.
Everything that the world offers, the craving to satisfy fleshly desires, the chasing after the things that you see and want to have, and the pride that comes with any success in life, none of these things comes from the Father. It's all from the world.
Right.
And the world and all of the desires it creates will eventually disappear, but everyone who obeys God will live forever. So last time we looked at John's instruction not to love the world. It's
right, and you pointed out how like 50 times he says
love.
love, and there's one time he says don't love, and it is to do with the world.
And it's interesting that John doesn't try and give us a comprehensive list of things that takes our focus from God.
Right.
Instead of doing that, he just gives three broad categories that are often at the centre of our focus on the world.
Right.
This world that's essentially hostile to God. So John lists these, knowing that the love for the world destroys us, separates us from a genuine love for God, and it traps us in things that ultimately are destined to fail and to disappoint.
Right.
So the lust of the flesh is a phrase that's often used in translating this verse. I've avoided actually using those exact words.
I noticed that.
And I translated it as craving to satisfy fleshly desires.
Because when you say, like most translations do, the lust of the flesh, it absolutely conjures up one thing, right?
Sexual sin. As soon as you say lust. And it's actually talking about that, but a lot more than that.
So you're saying it is that, but it's also more. It could be lust for food. It could be lust for, like money.
So the word that is translated as lust in a lot of the translations that we've got is the Greek word epithymia, which means a deep desire, a longing for something, and usually it's in the context of longing for something that is forbidden.
Right.
So it's actually to do with more than sexual sin, and even that insatiable desire to eat chocolate cake. It's more. It's to do with more than that.
That's for all you sweet tooths out there.
It's more than the physical that John is talking about.
It could be hot chips for you. I mean, it could...
we need to remember that one of the reasons that John was writing this letter was to counter the Gnostics.
Right.
Who said that all matter, everything in the material world was and is of itself evil. So John is not talking just about the physical here. That would be giving ground to the Gnostics. So when we just list it as sexual sin, we're really failing to do what John was trying to do, and that was to point away from what the Gnostics were teaching.
Because of course their conclusion is, because it's all evil, it's all, going to burn, just do whatever you want, it doesn't matter. Whereas John's saying, no, actually, what we do in this world, physically what we do does matter. It does have eternal consequences.
So the fleshly desires that he's talking about here are all of those desires that I might have for the things of the world rather than for the will of God. All that panders to my desires, to my appetites, rather than what God wants for me. Any sinful desire that's contrary to the will of God.
Right.
So when the Bible refers to the flesh, it's most commonly referring to the propensity to sin that we have in our human life. The nature that we inherited from Adam was dominated by sin and rebellion. And it's closely tied to the physical aspect of human life that's called the flesh. Every human being is born of the flesh. The union between a man and a woman produces another flesh-bound human being. God created all things to reproduce after their own kind. So human beings born in a sinful nature produce human beings born with a sinful nature. So the Bible's implication that the flesh, the natural human inclination is sinful, is not an accusative thing. It's not saying you are a sinner. It's just a statement of simple fact.
Right.
We live in a fallen, a sinful world, and desires that arise from being fleshly creatures in such a fallen world can be too easily directed by that world and by the will that we have rather than the will and purpose of God.
There's a great saying, Dave, that would apply to many of those things. Like we've said in this series and in other series before, we're not saying that desire for chocolate cake or hot chips is evil in and of itself, or that the desire for sexual intimacy is wrong in and of itself. These are God-given things. There's this saying: all of these things are fine as servants, but terrible as masters.
Yes.
They must never be our primary. Our primary is, as you know, the Ten Commandments. The first commandment is, you shall have no other gods, or you will have nothing before me. I need to be, for this to work, I need to be number one, says God. I'm the one who's going to sustain you, provide for you, look after you. And yes, I will give you plenty of chocolate cake and hot chips, and sleep and sex when you get married and all that sort of stuff. But it must never, you got to control it. It's not your master. It must never be your primary.
I think desires that arise from the fact that we are human, fleshly creatures, those desires are not sin in and of themselves. No. We may desire, as you said, to eat, drink, or find shelter and comfort, and they're natural desires that God has created within us. But because we're born with this sinful nature, desiring to please ourselves, even at the expense of God's moral law, and when such self-pleasing desires rule over us, taking priority over God's will, they cause us to violate God's standard of perfection. In other words, we miss the mark, hamartia, which is, in other words, we sin. We crave to satisfy these desires, even though the thing that we seek may be forbidden by God's law. Hence, we go back to what John had written. So, for example, hunger propels us to find food, and that's a good thing. It's to do with our survival. It's not a sin. Jesus ate, Jesus drank when he was on earth. So food sustains life as we know it. So we desire it, but it does not guarantee life. And when that desire to eat becomes something that we do simply to satisfy the taste or desires, it turns into gluttony, which becomes a sin.
Exactly. So it's a good servant, but a bad master. There's this verse from Thessalonians chapter 4. It says, "It is God's will that you should be sanctified and that you should avoid, in this case, sexual immorality, that each one should learn to control your own body." And that's the key here. You should learn to control these things. They're not bad in and of themselves. Money is not bad in and of itself, but it's a bad master. It must always only be a servant. And he's saying you should learn to control these desires in 1 Thessalonians 4 in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust. And there's that word again, same word that's translated, not in passionate lust like the pagans who don't even know God. And verse 7 says, "For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life." And so we are called to this standard of, look, all these things that God provides, they're fine, but don't let them rule. Don't let them be a master. And we all know people who've done that with various things. And you're mentioning food, for example, because we're trying to take the focus off just sex and onto other things that may control people. And food is one of those. That's a great servant. You have to have it. Money's similar. It's a great servant. You have to have it. But it's a terrible master.
And there's no doubt that when the sexual issue, when natural sexual desire is perverted into something that we find difficult to control, it can lead to all sorts of sin, and it can lead to consequences that can be emotional, physical, as well as spiritual. Sex outside of marriage, fornication, selfish sex are out of bounds. They're forbidden because they're enslaving. If we give in to temptation to meet our own fleshly desires independently of God, we're yielding to this lust, this craving of the flesh. And these are the craving to satisfy selfish desires, or the lust of the flesh, as we've tended to call them. So this craving for fleshly desire is all desires centered in our nature without regard to the will of God. It's that which constantly fights against the things of God in your life. The craving to satisfy fleshly desire is contrary to satisfying the will of God. So in Galatians 5, Paul tells us quite a lot about the flesh versus the spirit in that conflict. Yeah. And he outlines some examples of the deeds of the flesh followed by the fruit of the spirit. And the contrast is...
Yeah, stark, isn't it?
Incredible.
Yeah.
So if we love the world and give into the cravings to satisfy fleshly desire, we can expect to see these kind of attitudes and actions characterizing our life. On the other hand, if we're not bound by the world system, but rather controlled by the Holy Spirit, we can expect to see the fruit of the Spirit operating in our life.
Right.
And by the way, it's fruit.
Yeah, not fruits.
Yeah, so many people add the S.
Yeah, it comes as a package.
It's a package. Have you ever noticed in the Garden of Eden, Satan first appealed to the lust of the flesh? Yeah, the devil said to Eve, "Is there any fruit in the garden that God has told you not to eat?" Now, sometimes we think the way that we read it is that they're looking at this one tree and says, "Did God tell you not to eat that tree?" But what he actually asked, is there any fruit in the garden that God has told you not to eat? Satan's attack is generally to find what God has said not to do. And then he focuses on that. He says, "Is there anything that God says you can't do?" "Oh, that one? Ah, well, now let's talk about that one." Okay, that's what temptation is all about. That fruit. Oh, yes, he says to Eve. He doesn't want you to eat that fruit because he doesn't want you to be wise and have knowledge. But you'd like to, wouldn't you, Eve?
Yeah.
This was the approach that he took. The fruit looked good to Eve, so why not have a bite? Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?
Yeah, and she's obviously thinking this through and going, well, I mean, how much bad can it, how bad can it be? How much harm can I do? Just to have a nibble, have a little bit of that, and then convinces Adam to do the same.
So there's lots of trees in the garden. And that's why the devil said, "Is there any tree that God said not to eat?" And she says, "Oh, only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." And then Satan distorts and questions the word of God when he attacks the mind. And we all have residual flesh patterns that become points of vulnerability. And Satan seems to know just what buttons to press and when to press them. Yeah. What could be tempting to one person may simply not be tempting to another. It's important that we recognise our weaknesses and don't subject ourselves to unnecessary temptation. We need to limit our personal freedom for the sake of someone who may have a weakness in an area of life where we're actually strong.
100%. That reminds me of that verse from Romans chapter 14, where, he's talking at that point, about buying meat at the market. Let's say you go down to Woolies or Coles, and there was a lot of gods in that culture, in the Roman, world, and in Rome in particular, where he was writing this too in Romans 14. And Corinth, he wrote the same thing in Corinth. He goes, look, sometimes they would sacrifice an animal to their god, small g, and then they'd sell the meat. And some people are going, oh, what if you eat that meat? Are you going to get tainted? Is it going to affect you? Are you going to be, And Paul is basically saying, no, look, they're not real gods. They're just bits of wood and rock. But he says, and I'll read it to you. He says in verse 15 of Romans 14, he says, "If your brother or sister, though, is distressed because of what you eat, or anything you do, frankly, because of what you do, you are no longer acting in love. Yep. Do not, by your eating or by whatever you choose to do, Do not destroy someone for who Christ died. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All food is clean, but it is wrong for a person to eat anything that causes someone else to stumble. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine. There's another one, alcohol. Some people feel free to drink a glass of wine, and some people go, oh, no, shouldn't drink wine, and you go, well, then I won't.
Yep.
That's what he's saying. He says, don't do anything else that would cause your brother or sister to fall. In fact, I mentioned he wrote the same to the Corinthians. In chapter 8, he says, therefore, if what I eat or drink or do causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again.
Yep.
So that I will not cause them to fall. In other words, love trumps freedom.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm free to have a glass of wine, or I'm free to eat a nice Scotch fillet, but if it's going to be unloving to somebody, if somebody's, like, for example, if I've got someone who was an alcoholic to come over for dinner,
You're not
it is
have a
not
glass of
loving.
wine.
It is not loving at all. It's that person, you don't know what's going on. Even if they're going, no, it's fine. Don't do it. Just don't.
No.
Just have a glass of water, for goodness sake.
That's it.
It's more loving. That's what love trumps freedom.
And that's the way that we demonstrate love to one another, by the way that we interact with them. Remember, it's not a sin in itself to be tempted, but entertaining those thoughts will lead to sin. So if you consider them in your mind, your emotions will be stimulated in the wrong direction, and eventually your willpower is going to crumble.
Right.
It's wise to keep a constant check on our appetites. How are we directing them? It's that one small taste that leads to being controlled by the desire, that leads to making an idol out of it, that leads even ordinary pleasures to be destroyed, that leads to an openness to betray even the closest friend for this idol, whatever it happens to be. And we can go on about misdirected appetites or appetites gone wrong, drugs, alcohol, sex, money, power. You can fill the blanks. There's heaps there.
Even things that are on the surface, they're very good. Like, I like to go to the gym. And I think that's a good thing to do, to stay healthy and to stay physically fit and strong. I think that's admirable. But I see some people at the gym that have taken that to an unhealthy extreme, where, it becomes an idol to them. God is not number one. He's definitely down the list. Their gym workout, their physical appearance is number one. Even then, so there's nothing wrong with going to the gym. It's when it's out of order.
Its appetite's gone wrong.
Right.
John isn't saying you can't live like that and be a Christian. What he's saying is you can't live with appetites that are misdirected. And
I like that. I
I
think that'll be the title of this little session. Appetite's gone wrong.
Yeah. You can't live like that and claim to love the Father. If you're not loving somebody else, you can't be claiming to love the Father. This is a light and dark issue. It's a black and white. And be careful when someone tries to tempt you into something that might only seem grey. It's black and white. There's no kingdom of grey. Right. There's a story about a kid who saw two thermometers hanging side by side on the wall next to the window in his grandparents' kitchen. And one of the temperatures says 24 and the other one says 11. The one, he says, closest to the windows must be wrong. He says to the grandpa, it's warmer than 11 in here, so that one's wrong. And grandpa says, no, they're both right. And he pointed to a small tube running from one of the thermometers out through the window frame. He said, this tube allows that thermometer to show the temperature that's on the outside. The other one shows the temperature on the inside. And that's why they can be right next to each other and have two totally different readings.
I can see where you're going with this.
And these thermometers, they're two Christians standing side by side. One's warm, keeps close to God, while the other is cold, probably more involved in the things in the world, hanging out with the wrong crowd and not concerned about sharing God's love with others. That's how we need to be. We need to make sure that we don't have something that runs out there. We need to keep our communion
Let me just clarify there when Dave just said hanging out with the wrong crowd. Jesus did tell us, go and hang out with the wrong crowd. Go and hang out with those people, but do not take on their value system. Their values are not kingdom values.
Yes.
We are light and dark, like you said. There's no gray. Our values, look at, you said Galatians chapter 5, the stark difference between the acts of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit. It's massively different. Our values, what we value, what we aspire to, what we love, must be kingdom values.
Yep. So next time we'll look at a couple of the other areas that John mentioned. That's one. We'll look at the other couple.
So does this mean we'll get past verse 17?
We'll at least get to the end of verse 17.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we'll see you next week on Theology Thursday, and we hope you have a wonderful week. God bless you.
Bless you.